Tuesday night, the SEC is going to officially release the permanent opponents for each SEC team. We talked about this a few weeks back. The SEC did vote to move to a 9-game conference schedule. Each team will have 3 permanent opponents that they will play on an annual basis, based mostly on history, rivalries, and also competitive balance, which is a big part of things. Those will be reevaluated on a 4-year basis. So, whoever you get this round 1, you're going to have them for 4 years, and then we'll go from there to see if we have to make any adjustments moving forward. Those have already been leaked. Chris Lowe, formerly of ESPN, now of On 3, he got the scoop, and he put everything out a day early. I guess we'll see if it somehow blows up in his face and it's wrong tomorrow. But as of right now, Mississippi State, we do know their 3 permanent opponents will be Ole Miss, which everybody knew that, Alabama, which is a game that there was a lot of discussion about really over the years, whether or not State Alabama would be a permanent game because of some of the different factions at play there. And then interestingly enough, Vanderbilt, team State does not have a whole lot of history with, but I'm not complaining one bit about that. A little bit of a weird one. So this is what I'll say. Mississippi State was always going to be in an interesting situation with this because ultimately there is one game State has to play within the SEC, and that's the Egg Bowl. There is not another rivalry, Mayhem brings only over a 4-year period, so this is not going to be the case. This may be the case beyond 4 years. If it all goes to plan and it looks well, maybe they'll stick with it, but it could change. The Egg Bowl is the only game Mississippi State has to play. There is not a secondary SEC rivalry that either Mississippi State or an opponent views as like, oh, that's a game we have to have. There's a ton of history with the likes of Alabama, LSU, Auburn. Mississippi State is actually the most played opponent for all 3 of those teams. The LSU one is always weird to me. I would have assumed Ole Miss. The Auburn-Alabama one, that's a little bit of like, everyone would assume it's those teams would be each other's most played, but there was a long stretch where the Iron Bowl did not get played because of nastiness within the rivalry. So State and Auburn played Mississippi State a bunch. So State's the most played opponent for those 3 teams. A ton of games over the years. So there's a lot of history with Mississippi State mostly being on the losing end, but it's still a lot of games been played historically. But none of those are true rivalries. There have been moments. I think if you look on Mississippi State's Wikipedia, it talks about LSU State and Bama State as being rivalry games. Mississippi State fans do not consider those rivalries, and the other side of those games do not consider them rivalries either. It's just other than being a regional conference rival. It's just those are games that have been played historically. That said, so with that in mind, the only game you have to get played is the Egg Bowl. That meant that we're going to open the door for other weird games to potentially get added in. If everybody has to get 3 permanent opponents, State was probably going to end up with somebody else, which I think is where the Vanderbilt things comes in. I don't think anybody really saw that happening. That's very random. You do get Alabama. So the Alabama of it all, what I'll say is I fully understand why it happened. Like, I'm not oblivious to it. One, the chance of Mississippi State getting 3 games against 3 kind of like a totally favorable draw across the board, it was pretty low. It's a competitive balance thing. Bama made it very clear from day one when this first brought up a few years back when Saban was still the coach that it was not going to be fair to them if they had to play LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee on an annual basis. And officially, the LSU game is on the chopping block. They will not be playing the Tigers annually. They'll still have Auburn, obviously, and they'll still have Tennessee each year. But LSU is going to become an every other year matchup going forward, at least for the time being. Bama wanted a game that would level things out because obviously Auburn and Tennessee, 2 teams that are national title contenders at their best. Having 3 such games, if you had LSU, would be much tougher than what most everybody else in the SEC has to deal with. So they looked for competitive balance. And when you add in the fact that Bama and Mississippi State have such a long history of playing each other and the proximity, it was going to happen. Do I love it? No, because I've had to sit through so many beatings at the hand of the Crimson Tide for so long that I have no interest in seeing that game continue. Literally, while Mississippi State has beaten Alabama in my lifetime, I have not seen Mississippi State beat Alabama since being a State fan. The last win was 2007. I was not paying attention to college football in 2007. Um, so I have no interest in seeing that series continue, but I fully understand that it was going to happen. That it was just going to be tough for it to not take place. What I will say for that series, and I'm not saying this is a shot just because we have the Bama guy here in Christian,
Mm-hmm.
Bama post Saban is not going to be Bama as it was under Saban. And I say that as
True.
someone who actually likes Kalen DeBoer and thinks that if he's given a fair shot, he can have success. Like, I don't think Bama's about to fall off the face of the earth. But Bama's probably about to look more like a typical top end team in college football. And top end teams sometimes still lose games to lesser opponents in games that they're not supposed to. Bama was sort of a very unique situation under Saban where that pretty much didn't happen. Like, even when they did take a random weird loss, it ended up being usually to a pretty good team most of the time. Um, so it's going to, like, you're not talking about the same dominant Alabama moving forward. The
Mm-hmm.
Vanderbilt over of it all more than makes up for any concern. I will say. And I understand right now Vanderbilt looks good and fun, and they're winning games. They're a genuinely good team. I understand all of that. Historically, like, Mississippi State's one of those programs historically in the SEC. There's not been another team you could look at and say if we play them on an annual basis, we should win most of those games. Vanderbilt is the one. Vanderbilt is the one team in the conference that Mississippi State operating at a normal level, even if Vanderbilt is having some success, State should be able to win that game. And again, maybe Clark Lee has something rolling here. We'll see what they are once Diego Pavia stops playing college football 20 years from now. But like right now, Vanderbilt's in a good spot. I don't know if that's going to continue forever and ever. And maybe Mississippi State falls into the abyss, but I like what Levy's doing right here in this moment. So to get Vanderbilt on the schedule, like, I think mathematically, I think Mississippi State was projected a lot. It was going to be Ole Miss, Kentucky, Texas A&M was kind of one that would get drawn up a lot, or maybe Ole Miss, Kentucky, Alabama. By getting Vanderbilt instead of a Kentucky, instead of a Texas A&M, your odds of getting a win out of that trio on an annual basis is significantly higher. So even with getting Alabama on the schedule every year, I think this draw works out well for Mississippi State.
Yeah, and to kind of put it in Alabama's perspective, just being a fan, growing up watching the Tide and everything. I mean, I like that this game is going to come back for a little bit. Maybe this is going to only last for a year or so, but still, it is going to be odd. I get keeping Auburn and Tennessee, your two biggest rivals, as Alabama. LSU is still a big one too. This is a series that goes back a long time. I don't know exactly, but Alabama, I mean, 57 wins, 27 losses. There's 5 ties. I want to say it's got to be one of the older rivalries between two SEC teams. Now, it's probably not as old as Auburn, Georgia, or Auburn, Alabama, or anything weird like that, but it's kind of honestly going to suck to not have LSU, but I was still pretty upset when they took away the Mississippi schools because even with Ole Miss, uh, you know, take Mississippi State out of it just for a minute. Ole Miss, even, I mean, Alabama would play annually, and they had some competitive games, and Ole Miss was able to even pull some upsets every now and then. But I don't know, man. It is what it is. I'm happy they didn't screw with the big rivalries when they considered all this. Like for Mississippi State, getting back to them, you got Ole Miss. That's fine. That's great. That's the Egg Bowl. You want to keep that. I don't know, man. I just to kind of reiterate your thoughts. Like, was there another opponent that you said they can't mess with other than Ole Miss, or did they just kind of just keep the Egg Bowl and leave it at that?
Yeah, State was ultimately going to be a filler team for somebody.
Right.
Now, like, I will say, like, Kentucky, I think a lot of people piece them together because Kentucky also does not. I've said Kentucky like 5 times. They consider Tennessee their big SEC rival, and I think they did
Right.
get them on, like, as an annual. Tennessee doesn't really
They
care about.
got Yeah, Kentucky got Florida, Tennessee, and South Carolina. I'm actually surprised that they don't consider Florida their biggest rival because they've played a crap ton, like really. But
I think they care about the Florida series, but that was like Florida won that series like 32 games in a row at one point.
yeah, yeah,
It was just a few
like
years ago
dating
that
back to like yeah.
It was just a few years ago Kentucky found some success. Tennessee was a series Kentucky fans had always cared about. Tennessee fans didn't really care all that much about it. But there was a stretch.
Right.
They used to play to close the season. So, like, they wanted that game. But ultimately, like, Kentucky does not have a single SEC opponent that views them as, like, a big deal. And I'm not saying this to dunk on Kentucky. Like, it's just reality. Kentucky's big rival is Louisville. So it's in the non-conference. But Mississippi State and Kentucky had played every single year going back to the late 80s, had been a very competitive series, had a lot of fun games over the years. I think it made a lot of sense to put those two teams together. So I'm a little surprised that they didn't. But even then, like, a lot of people talked about, well, maybe Mississippi State, Texas A&M, because like A&M kind of doesn't have a ton of natural rivals within the SEC. Outside of Texas, like, they've sort of made A&M LSU a thing. A&M Arkansas was kind of an old Southwest thing. But like A&M Oklahoma was never really a thing. Like, even though they were in the Big 12 together, they don't really care about each other. And you see A&M ends up with Missouri, which, yeah, they joined the conference together. We're Big 12 teams. A&M and Missouri do not care about each other. Like, there's not a lot of history there. So people talked about maybe A&M Mississippi State just because it was like, hey, the two maroon and white ag schools that like it, both were coached by Jackie Sherrill. Both were coached by Emory Ballard. So they both have dog mascots. Mississippi State was once Mississippi A&M and was once the Aggies. So there's a lot of parallels between the two schools. Both have traditions that other fan bases think are annoying. So there's a lot of parallel between State and A&M. So it made some sense. But obviously that's not a rivalry. Like, we don't really care about each other. So State was going to get somebody, and they ultimately ended up with Vanderbilt. You know, going back to your point with the LSU game for Bama, I am surprised that was not like a TV network thing of, hey, like ESPN and ABC saying, like, y'all understand that game gets insane ratings every single time we play it, right? So, like, it needs to be on the schedule every single year. I guess the counter argument is because in recent years, Bama's had – I said that LSU won just a few years ago, but the series has been more lopsided in Bama's favor, and the Georgia game has probably become a little bit bigger, even not being an annual game. I could see this being a deal where what they look at it is saying that, no, we're not going to get Bama LSU every year, but every year we will either get Alabama Georgia or Alabama LSU. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if they'd fix the schedule so that they have those games rotating for Alabama, so that they're always guaranteed to get the one big draw. I will say this, in terms of State and Bama playing each other, there is part of me that does appreciate as much as I don't care about that series because I've had to sit with Mississippi State losing, and I'm always going to come at it from the perspective of what's going to help Mississippi State from a wins-loss standpoint. There is real history between the two teams, and I do think there is something to be said of playing the teams that you have a history with and have the regionality with. And, like, I'll be completely honest, man. Like, I like the SEC West. I understand why divisions were a problem because you didn't get to see the other teams in your conference enough. But I don't know, man. Like, playing the games against Bama, LSU, Auburn, Arkansas every single year, like, along with the Egg Bowl, like, there was something to be said about having those games on the schedule that you knew you were always going to play that I do miss a little bit. So getting Bama on the schedule does bring back some of that, just a touch. And having that regular opponent on the slate does matter a little bit. We'll see how that series looks like in the future.